Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. So today's technique is great for one-layer cards and works with pretty much any stamps you may have. And I call this frame stamping. Basically, you stamp or draw a frame on a card and do stamping inside of it, outside of it, or maybe a combination of both. I have several examples for you today, and I'll first start with stamped frames. Then we'll step it up into creating our own frames. This is a nice way to give any stamps you have a fresh new look. Let's start with this example here, where I have a simple frame with the sentiment and some fun flowers around it. I'm using the Altenew Floral Art stamp set for my first card. I like that this has large images that kind of have like an artsy, playful look to them. That's a style that I have a hard time creating on my own. So to have a stamp set that layers and makes it easy to achieve this look is something that appeals to me. I also wanted to mention that Altenew stamps now come with this little fold-out booklet. What's cool about it is there are these little card panels that you can put on a card, just cut it right out. There's also the guide if it's a layering stamp set. There is the little key for those card panels and what color inks they suggest. And each of the booklets is a little different. I'll show you some more examples later. But I think this really adds to the value of these stamp sets because you can get ideas for how to use these just by grabbing the package. I put them inside of my large stamp pockets along with the coordinating dies. I'm also using the Altenew Geo Frames stamp set. You can see I've used this one a lot already. Now, this is great for today's technique, but if you don't have a frame stamp set, I will show you a technique you can do at the end of this video. Here is the little idea booklet for this stamp set. Look how beautiful those are, and some suggested products that you can use with this stamp set. I will say these booklets are very inspiring to me and helps me to create faster. Okay, so I'm starting out by stamping one of the frames onto a piece of masking paper. I'm using my MISTI stamping tool just simply because it's easy to stamp with, but you can use an acrylic block. Now the masking paper that I'm using is the Avery removable adhesive sheets. These have the right amount of stick on them to work for masking, and I find they're thick enough that even if I stamp on them a lot, the ink doesn't bleed through it. So I'm cutting out the frame right along the outside stamped edge. This will be the perfect mask for protecting the framed area of my card. I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. I'm using a very heavyweight Neenah 110-pound Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. I find that is perfect for one-layer cards because it's nice and thick, and I'll link to it below. I placed my frame mask and kind of towards the center top of my card. I drew pencil lines to help me make it sure it was center. I'm starting with the two largest flowers, the outline images of the flowers, from that Floral Art stamp set that I showed you. And I'll start by heat embossing these. So I'm using my anti-static powder bag, and then I will stamp these with VersaMark Ink and add Altenew silver embossing powder. Now I'm going for a soft look of yellows and grays, so I thought the silver embossing would be nice. You could do black embossing or even just black stamping, but I thought the silver went nicely with the yellow and gray. I then stamped and heat embossed a little outline leaf, and then from here we'll do only stamping with ink, no heat embossing. So I did the basic outline, and now we can start adding the color. So I'm using my stamping guide that's in the package to figure out how to line up the first layer of these images. And again, these are artsy. These aren't going to completely fill in the outline, but it gives a really cool look. I want this to be soft, so I used Altenew Buttercream Ink, which is a really soft yellow. But I stamped it twice just to make it a little bit darker. Now I'm lining up the middle images, and this time I'm using Altenew Warm Sunshine Ink. And this gives a nice little bit of bright color in the center of those flowers. Now it's time to add the leaves. Instead of doing green, I decided to use the Altenew Morning Frost Ink, which is a gray color that has a little bit of a green tone to it, and it is so much fun for leaves. I was inspired to try this by that little idea booklet, so I found it helpful. Now here I was a little too lazy to mask the large flower, so I just put tape on the parts of the flower that I needed to mask before I did the stamping. After I did lots of stamping towards the top left and bottom right of the card, I went ahead and removed the mask, and you can see that perfect open area ready for stamping. Next, I will silver heat emboss the frame right in the opening. Now I could have started by doing this silver embossed frame first, then done all the stamping. But I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do silver or black or yellow for the frame, so I did all my stamping first so I could get a better idea of what would look good and decided to go with silver. So I'm stamping that with VersaMark ink, adding the silver heat embossing powder, and then heat setting it with my heat gun. And you can see how that mask perfectly protected that frame. So I have the look of layering, but this is a one-layer card. Now I wanted a few little touches of silver embossing here and there, like towards the center of my flowers and little dots. I'm using my Quickie glue pen to do this. I even drew lines down the flowers. So basically this is putting down a thin line of glue, and all I'll do is add my silver embossing powder to it and heat set it, just like as if I stamped it. You could use a VersaMarker pen to do this, but I find the Quickie glue pen works great, and many of us have a little liquid glue pen like that. That's a great way to add little touches of embossing. For the sentiment, I used the new Altenew Hello Gorgeous stamp set. There are some wonderful sentiments in here, and I'll use this set for sentiments throughout this video. I silver heat embossed the fancy hello, and I'm using my MISTI Creative Corners to make sure the smaller sentiments that says sending love and hugs is straight before I start stamping. The MISTI Creative Corners are great for making sure everything is straight so you don't mess it up at this point. I decided to stamp this part of the sentiment with that Morning Frost light gray ink. Since it's super soft, I'm going to stamp it twice just to make it a little bit darker so it shows up. So we end up with a perfectly one-layer card that'll go through the mail nicely. You could change up the color scheme on this and get a different look. But what's fun about this is by masking the frame, we have stamping on the outside and we get this great look of dimension. But really there's no bulk to it at all. So my next example shows the same stamp sets, but we're doing the stamping inside of the frame. This is a great way to kind of create a focal point on a card. So I'm stamping the rectangle frame with VersaFine Onyx black ink. This is a sharp, crisp black pigment ink. So I can go ahead and take this and add clear embossing powder to it and heat set it to get the look of black embossing powder. Now you could just stamp if you wanted to here, but I really like to heat emboss the frame just to give it the look of a little bit of dimension. Now in this case, instead of cutting a mask, I just decided to use my purple tape. You could use any kind of masking tape or post-it tape for this, and I'm just masking off the center of the frame. I'm adding my VersaFine black Onyx ink again, and I'm stamping the outline flower towards the bottom corner. I like to stamp the focal image kind of off center on the frame and make sure that it's kind of chopped off. It really helps with that frame look. So now it's time to stamp the layers or add the color on this. I used Frosty Pink and Pink Pearl inks for the flower. And I again reached for that Morning Frost greenish gray color for the leaves. I did really simple stamping here, and I really like that this stamp set is very forgiving in how you stamp it. And you get a really cool look that I would never have been able to achieve on my own. Once I'm done with the stamping, I can remove the masking pieces, and there we have our framed stamping. I added a little bit of darker color because my colors were super soft, so I just used my Copic markers to add a little bit of darker color here and there. I also decided to stamp the background, so I used the Altenew Pinstripe stamp set. I really like this pinstripe background, and I've used it in many videos. So I thought that would be a nice subtle touch for the background. So I'm just temporarily taping my card into my MISTI. Remember, this is still a one-layer card. I'm laying the stamp over it, and then I need to mask off the center. Now you could totally cut a rectangle mask here. for some reason, I just decided to tear up pieces of masking tape and cover it up. I reused the pieces from before, and it worked just fine. So if you have a strange shape, you could always use your masking tape or just die cut a mask, whatever you want, whatever works for you. But now I have the pinstripes on the outside and the floral stamping on the inside, and it looks layered, but it is a perfectly one-layer card. I also added a hello from that same gorgeous flowers stamp set that I showed you earlier. And there you have the finished card. Now I'll be honest, I messed it up. I got a fingerprint on the edge. So instead of pitching it, I just trimmed a little bit off the edge and glued the panel onto a pink note card. So it's not exactly one layer anymore, but it is still smooth, and we get the look of dimension from the frame stamping. Again, here is that Hello Gorgeous stamp set where the sentiment is from, just like in the last example. So I used a lot of the same stamp sets, but got a completely different look. Here's another example where I do stamping on the inside of the frame and on the outside. I used the Altenew Life is Awesome stamp set. This is a beautiful stamp set for getting fun layered flowers that are easy to layer. This is another one of those artsy sets. And there are so many different flowers included in the set that you can create some really neat looking floral clusters. So this time I decided to start with my frame stamping first, and I'm using my anti-static powder bag. Then I'm taking the square frame and stamping it with the black ink towards the center of the card, and then heat embossing it with clear embossing powder. Okay, so after I heat set that, I did also stamp one onto masking paper, and I'm cutting along the outside edge of that so I can mask off my stamped frame on my card. So once I put that in place, I can start doing my stamping around this. Now I'm going to save time on this card by stamping the same thing in the top left corner and the bottom right corner. So I'm starting with 2 flowers, and I'm stamping these with a soft lilac, which is a really soft purple ink. Stamping that in the top corner, then watch what I do. I rotate the card in my MISTI, and then I stamp it again in the other corner. This will save me a lot of time. Now you'll notice I'm double stamping again. You don't have to do that, but I decided I wanted my color to be a little bit darker. I like being able to double stamp with my stamping tool because it allows me to get more colors from my ink. By stamping more than once, I get a darker color. Now for this little flower cluster here, I'm using Arctic Ink, which is a super light blue ink that's just beautiful. So I'll continue to do this. Arrange my images in one corner, stamp them, rotate the card, and stamp them in the other corner. I really like all the leaf images included in this particular Life is Awesome stamp set. Lots of small leaves that you could use with other floral stamp sets too. So I continued to do the stamping, the same things in both corners, with the different layers included in the stamp set. And I just chose colors that were slightly darker from the Altenew Ink collection. Before you know it, you have this really beautiful kind of wildflower looking collection of flowers that I just can't get enough of. So I'll be using this stamp set in a future video also. I'm skipping through a lot of this stamping since it's basic layering, and Altenew provides great guides for that. Next, I'm using the Altenew Halftone Squares stamp set. This is a really unique set that has squares and rectangles of heavy dots towards one edge and lighter dots to the other. So you get this really cool ombre kind of look. You can see the fun examples that are included in the little idea packet. I'm taking one of the square images and I'm going to stamp that inside of our frame. This set would be cool to stamp along the edge of a card or like along a little border. I can't wait to use it more, and I thought it was perfect inside this frame. So I'm stamping it with that Arctic ink, which is the super light blue ink, and it fits perfectly inside of the square. And I thought it just added some interest into that, and then we can just add our sentiment on top. I again did the Hello Sending Love and Hugs from the Hello Gorgeous stamp set that I showed you earlier. You can see how the flowers are right up against the heat embossed frame, thanks to the masking that we did. And then we have that fun little bit of color inside of the frame also. You could even mask off the outside of the card and stamp with a background stamp inside of the frame as a backdrop for your sentiment. Okay, all my examples so far used those frame stamps for my frame stamping, but I wanted to show you that you can create your own frame very easily. The stamps I used on this one are from this new Altenew Build-A-Flower set. Now this Build-A-Flower set is the stamp set and the coordinating die sold together. I like that the floral image is very large and fills a card quite nicely. But in today's video, I'm going to capture just a part of the flower by putting it inside of a framed area. This time, I'm just using tape to mask off a rectangle area on my card. You could die cut from masking paper any shape you want. I thought this was pretty easy, and I used the guides on my work surface to make sure I got the tape straight. Once I was happy with it, I went ahead and put it into my stamping tool, lined up my flower stamp so it's off center on the frame, so it kind of chops it off, stamped it with the black pigment ink, added clear embossing powder, and heat set it. You don't have to heat emboss this, but I thought it gives a nice look to this small area of stamping. Next, I can do the layering with the stamp set. There are large layering images to line up with these, so it makes it easy. You're actually stamping multiple flowers at once. Started with the Arctic Blue ink, which is super light, so I stamped that a couple of times. Then I moved on to the next layer, and I used the Caribbean Sky ink. I continued to add the additional layers, including the green leaves and the yellow for the center of the flowers. Once I finished my stamping, I carefully removed the tape. I find that it is best to kind of fold the tape back on itself. Then you can remove the tape easily and you don't have to worry about damaging your paper. It really works well. Okay, so next I thought it'd be fun to stamp the rest of the image with a light blue ink on the outside of the frame. So I'm taking that same floral outline image that I started with, lining it up with the image that's already on my card, and I'm stamping it again with that Arctic light blue ink. So you can see the lines are now light blue on the outside of the framed area. I just thought that added a fun touch. Now I'm using my black marker to draw the frame in with a T-ruler. There are a few different ways you could have done this. You could do a double line if you want to, but I just decided to do a basic black line, and I went back over it just to make it a little bit heavier when I was done. You could use your Quickie glue pen and then put embossing powder on this if you wanted to heat emboss it. So you can make your own frame very easily. I then added the You Really Are the Best from the same stamp set just underneath the frame. So you can see how I got a completely different look for the stamp by adding that frame stamping to it. Now I have one more example. I'm not going to show you all of it because it's pretty basic, but I wanted to show you the stamps I used because I thought they were a lot of fun. This is the Altenew block print stamp set. Each of these stamps is sized nicely to go towards the center of a card, just as a simple backdrop. I'll show you the examples that they have in the little booklet. You can see how it's a perfect backdrop for a lot of the different images. But I'm going to use it to create a background. And this was inspired by a video I did a few weeks ago, which I'll link to here, as a way to get new looks from your background stamps. So I have a note card in my stamping tool here, and I have a diamond frame mask right at the center. I drew a pencil line down the center and across the center of the card as a guide. Now I am lining up each of these bold print stamps in a corner, using those pencil guides as a helpful little guide on where to stamp. I'm stamping each corner in a different color, and thankfully I have that mask in the center to create a clean area where I can put my focal point image. So you could use any big stamps for this corner stamping, but I thought these block print stamps were the perfect size for this technique, so I wanted to show that to you. Once I stamped in all four corners, I can go ahead and remove my mask and add whatever I want into the center. In this case, I just stamped the diamond frame with that Morning Frost color gray ink from Altenew. And then I decided to heat emboss a giant leaf image in the center. I used green embossing powder, very simple. This is from the Leaf Canopy stamp set that I've used many times in videos. So it's green heat embossed right on top. So in this case, I used frame stamping just to create a focal point on the card. A nice place for that big image to land, even though he kind of hangs out of the frame a bit too. I added a few gems, so there's a little dimension on this one, and also stamped the hello with black ink. Well, there you have a bunch of ideas for using frame stamping. It's an excellent way to get new looks from your stamps and also create focal points. If you're interested in the supplies that I featured today, they are linked below in the YouTube description. I have more information over on my blog. In the middle are a couple other videos that you might like. I hope this was helpful to you, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great week.